Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Plant-Free MD. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Chaffee, and today I have a very special guest, Mr. Daniel Trevor, who is the author of a new book that's coming out, The Unholy Trinity. Daniel, thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, Dr. C, how are thee?
Very
Dr.
good.
Anthony, the
Yeah,
plant-free MD.
yeah.
I love it. I'm a big fan. I love your content. In
Oh,
fact, I was
thanks.
just watching with Thomas Seyfried and you go at it,
Oh,
and it
yeah.
was really, yeah, it's quite. That guy is like, wow,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you and
Such
him
a great guy.
together with all that data was just so wonderful. So anyway, yeah, thank you for having me. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome. And
Yeah,
thank you for coming on. It's going to be great to talk.
yeah,
So for people,
absolutely.
yeah. So for people who haven't come across you before, can you please tell us a bit about you and what you do?
Well, my story is, as you can see behind me, I wrote this book, and it was a result of about 5 years ago, I had a heart attack and I almost died.
Mm,
And I thought I was Mr. Healthy. That wasn't supposed to happen to me, right? And
mm,
so, having studied technical data all my life, I decided to take a dive into the medical science and nutrition science and find out how could this happen to me? And what I discovered absolutely blew my mind. It shocked and infuriated me. It really pissed me off because
mm,
I discovered, look, I was just like everybody else. What we've been told to eat for decades, 70 years or so, has been killing us.
mm,
And I didn't know anything about low carb and this. I was total believing in the whole propaganda and BS of heart healthy whole grains. And, I didn't know that they turn into sugar when they go in your body and all that. And so, anyway, I had to take the dive into that. So, after the heart attack, I went to Google University and YouTube University and PubMed and all these different places, immersed myself in the studies and the books and so forth. And I found a lot of, you know, medical geniuses like yourself on the cutting edge of modern medical science and metabolic health. I found Ivor Cummins and Dr. Ford Brewer and Eric Berg and, David Perlmutter and, you know, a lot of geniuses that were turning me on to this whole low carb area. Diets that put you into what's called ketosis, as you know all about.
mhm,
And then I got a ton of lab tests because what I did was I discovered all these tests, and I reached out to Dr. Ford Brewer, who's brilliant at all the tests. He's taught thousands of doctors over 30 years at Johns Hopkins, and he's brilliant at all the testing. And I reached out to him. I said, "Look, I'm writing this book, blah blah blah." I had to send him some, of course. And I said, "Would you write a chapter in my book delineating what are the most important blood labs and scans that anyone can get online without needing a doctor's prescription? That way, you yourself can find out if you got something lurking, ready to pounce, or you're just fine, or somewhere in between that needs attention." And because too frequently, what happens is, and you know this better than I. You go to your doctor and you say, "Hey, I was watching this Doctor Chaffee, and I heard about this test and this other one. I'd like to get these two tests." And he might go, "Oh, you're fine. You don't need it. You're fine." And the only reason he's saying it is because he doesn't know what it is, wouldn't know how to interpret the results anyway. And the last thing that, of course, the doctors want to get from their patients is homework. They don't want homework. They want to do their what I call their now I'm supposed to's, right? Patient presents with XYZ. Now I'm supposed to ABC. Patient presents with QRS. Now I'm supposed to do DEF. Right? So they're locked into these it's drugs and procedures and drugs and procedures and more drugs and more procedures. And I just think it's wonderful that you are so closely connected to all that, and you've seen behind the curtain so many times, and it's like, wow, we really need to change things. Anyway, that's what happened to me. So I wrote the book, and I did a lot of research. Again, I was fortunate enough to very early on learn how to study well, so I could confront the terminology and nomenclature and that kind of thing, and take the dive. And my book, I'm proud to say, that is, it's got more scientific citations than any other health and wellness book out there. It's, most of them have two or 300 if they have any, which is good. So you can see where the information the person's coming providing, where it's coming from. Mine has 1,227. So I told everybody, I
Nice.
said, look, none of this is my opinion. This isn't Daniel's opinion. And just think of me as a friendly relay point of what the best of 21st century science has to offer for your health and wellness, and fix yourself. I did. You can too.
Oh, nice. And so when is that out now? Or is that coming out soon?
Yeah, no, no, no. It came out last year, actually
Oh, right.
about a year ago now. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then I started getting on these podcasts. The first
Mhm.
big one I had were the one that had let's see, I've been on all of your colleagues.
Mhm.
What really put the book on the map was last about a year ago. I was on with, and it was my first big one. It was with Dr. Ken Berry,
Mhm.
and
Nice.
I'm talking to his people, and I'm saying, wait, he has how many millions of followers?
Mhm.
Oh, well, I said, oh no. I said, so if we mess up, we can go back and edit that part up if I mess up, right? Oh no, it's a live stream. I went, holy shit. So I thought, oh my God. Okay. So they say, what's the matter? I said, well, I did write the book and I do know the data, but knowing the data and running it smoothly over my tongue, that's a little
Mhm.
different, you know? So, and,
Yeah.
oh, you'll be just fine. Don't worry. So we took the dive and we went into it. And I did stumble here and there a couple of places, but that shot the book to #1 on Amazon for heart
Nice.
disease, type 2 diabetes, and longevity. And I went, whoa, I got to do some more of these, more
Mm.
of these interviews, right? So then I've been on, I was on with Sean Baker, and he was telling me how he found keto first before I got the
Mhm.
carnivore. First thing he found was keto, and he was getting amazing results. And me too, because after I had the heart attack, I found out about all these tests from Ford Brewer, and I got a shitload of them done because I wanted to be able to have a benchmark where I could measure my, the labs from point A to point B in 6 months, 3 months down the line, and to know that I'm really making progress. And so it was just amazing what I was able to discover. And because I'm telling you, what we've been told to eat is just killing us. And I think of the book as three things. Basically, it's a how to on how I reversed four comorbidities that I'll tell you about. And it's also a bit of an expose on big food, big pharma, and big medicine. Now, having said that, I'm sure they're beautiful, wonderful people in all three of those things. In fact, even my older daughter, Chloe, works in the ER, for 10 years now. And so I love all of them. They've saved my life too, right? But there are certain aspects of each of them that are just on the edge of ethics there, right? And then it's also what I consider what you might think of as a situation and data evaluation and analysis of this. In 1930, the obesity rate in the United States was 1%. We are now approaching 50% in under 100 years, a mere 100 years. In 1930, the chronic illness rate was 7.5%. It's now over 60%. Never before in human history has a population this size gotten so fat and so sick so quickly. You got to say, what the hell is happening? And when you pull the strings and you do the analysis, it's the introduction of what I call the unholy trinity in the 20th century: the carbs, the sugar, and the oils, in the amounts and concentrations never before seen. I mean, of course, sugar's been around a long time. In fact, I found a reference. It was invented and cultivated in India. It was referenced in the this religious text called the Atharva Veda. That's about 1200 to 1500 BC. So that's been around a long time. But, like I said, never in the amounts and concentrations. For example, Hershey's made their first candy bar in 1900.
Mhm.
What a way to start a century, right? With the candy bar. And then all the other candies started coming after that too. And wheat has only been around, what, about 9,000 years. I have a whole chapter on that and its addictive nature. You probably know about that too.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so it's pretty wild. So, we're just trying to wake people up because there seems to be vested interests that want to keep us fat, sick, and addicted.
Mm. Yeah.
And that's the sub part of the subtitle. The book is Unholy Trinity. Subtitle: How Carbs, Sugar, and Oils Make Us Fat, Sick, and Addicted. and how to escape their grip because they are, addictive. I mean, I went through it too. You have to first, I give a lot of tips and tricks on how I got through it and how other people get through it too, because you got to make your list of what are the things that you cannot live without. Well, I got this, this, and this. Or it could be 10 times that list, right? And then your next task is to find delicious but healthy substitutes for all those unhealthy things that you can live with. Instead of a wheat and grain based pizza, you make an almond flour or something different until you can get away from all the grains and plants. There's just you have to do it little by little because some people can handle just jumping right into it. So I just say, look, take your time if you need to, but do that kind of thing. And then I get into whole intermittent fasting. And it's based on how we ate for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, right? The
Yeah.
anthropologists and bioarchaeologists have told us, look, we became the apex predator, and then our diet always consisted of what we could catch, kill, and eat, nose to tail, and what we might pick off a tree or a vine, but only when those berries were in season, right?
Mhm.
But that was it.
Yeah. And you know, I heard this argument the other day, so I'll run it by you. That well, chronic diseases are more prevalent now just because medicine's gotten so good. We've gotten rid of all the acute things, so they're just gone now, and so now it's just the chronic diseases are left over. How does that hold? How does that argument hold in your mind?
Oh my God. Well, look, here's the thing. It's like we didn't have these, as you know, and a lot of this
Hmm.
stuff I'm just saying for your audience, but in 1900 and prior, people died of infectious diseases like tuberculosis, influenza, pneumonia, that kind of thing. Maybe some gastroenteritis and things like that. Um, the very first medically recorded heart attack wasn't until 1912. I mean, I'm sure they may have happened throughout history, but the first medical one that was officially recorded is 1912, and cancer wasn't even like a thing, as they say, until the 30s. And so it was the introduction of all these when I say carbs, let me define what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about your industrially refined and processed grains, which they then turn into powders, which they then turn into bread, pasta, cereal, waffles, pancakes, tortillas, and on that way, right? And then we have candy, cake, ice cream, soda, fruit juice, and on and on. And then the oils. Oh my God. I was very fortunate to write when I wrote my chapter 6, which is all, the shocking truth about vegetable oils. I was able to get some charts and data from Nina Teicholz, Dr. Chris Kenobi, and Dr. Kate Shanahan. And these three are at the forefront of the whole vegetable oil scam and how poisonous they are because they have these ingredients, these chemicals that was it TBHQ and HNE, which is 4-hydroxynonenal, aldehydes like in cigarettes, you know, N-hexane. These things are carcinogenic, neurodegenerative, and 7 to 10 times more likely to cause inflammation and heart disease. It's like, wow. So those are the unholy trinity because when you go down the aisles of the supermarket, you pick up these packages, all three are there
Yeah.
in most things. In not
Yeah.
all, but in most things. But yeah, they're putting the oils in just about everything you can imagine, the crackers and the peanuts and everything else. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And then, yeah, and sugar and everything and processed carbs and things like that. Well, I mean, they're cheap. Sugar is addictive. It tastes nice, and you don't want any of that evil saturated fat. So they put in the heart healthy seed oils that have never existed in human history.
uh,
It is very strange, but I mean, there's so much propaganda and misinformation that's been drummed around for the last century at least more than that, but at least a century, and it's just picking through that, and people get very incensed. No, no, no. The data shows no. The data that you're talking about is the corrupt propaganda that we're talking about. This is stuff that people have come out and Procter and Gamble paid off the American Heart Association to say that seed oils were heart healthy and that animal fats were bad for the heart. It with no evidence, absolutely no, based on no evidence. They just
yeah, it
said
was
it
all
because they got paid. And there's so much more of it.
it's just money. It's just it seems
Yeah.
like I don't know. You look at throughout history when you get human beings next to money, something weird happens.
Yeah.
And I cover those two guys, William Proctor and James Gamble. They came from Europe and they wound up in Ohio. They looked at a bucket of this cottonseed oil, which was, they didn't even make it until it was 1865, I think.
Mm.
And it looked like lard, which people used to cook with. And they
Mm.
thought, hey, let's sell it to people, make some money. And so Crisco, they invented this, started flying off the shelves in 1911. And oh my God. And it turns out that we didn't find out until the 90s that Crisco has more trans fats, which have been
Mm.
proven now to be the most dangerous fat you can put in your body than any other food. And Crisco was in, they put it in everything. So anyway, and then in 2015, I think it was, the FDA ordered all manufacturers to get trans fats um, out of the food supply and all their products and everything. But still, what happens is, as you know, and I cover this in my chapter 6 on that, is that when you heat up these oils, they create more trans fats and all
Yeah.
of these chemicals that get activated and everything. They cause hyperphagia, which causes you to eat more. It's just a major destroyer of health. The oils, the seed oils, and people think, well, oh, I can't, And I tell them, look, if you have to have some oil, then try authentic olive oil, maybe some avocado oil or coconut oil, but try to get away from all of them. And again, I just try to advise people to just do the best they can on a gradient scale, and to eventually get away from it, because I think the worst food people are eating are the plant-based, wheat and grains.
Mm.
Those seem to create more cardiovascular bad effects than anything else.
Mm. Yeah. And why do you think that is, that they're sort of the worst of the three?
Well, here's the thing. My book has a lot of graphs and charts and images and
Mm.
photos. I like to give the reader an easy time of it so they can understand. They can understand when the graph's going like this on obesity or whatever, right? And I have a picture in chapter 1. First couple of chapters, I like to show the reader how we got here. How do we get to
Mm.
this state? Where I'm Mr. Healthy and I'm having a heart attack. It's like, so back in the 50s, they, well, about Ansel Keys and all his nonsense. They were pushing
Mhm.
these high carb, low fat diet because he had this concept that it was the meat and the butter and the cheese that was clogging up the arteries and everything. And many years later, they discovered this thing called electron microscopy, which of course you know about, which is where they snake up these teeny tiny cameras into the arteries where they can see what's going on. And they discovered this thing called the glycocalyx. What is that? The glycocalyx is this fuzz-like lining of the artery walls, which acts as the first line of defense against what's called pattern B small dense LDL particles. That's the first line of defense, right? And what they discovered was smoking, which was an epidemic back then,
Mm.
destroys the glycocalyx, right?
Mm.
Smoking destroys it. It was like, doctors were smoking around their patients, planes, restaurants, everywhere, right? And then what they discovered also years later was that a bigger destroyer, a worse destroyer of the glycocalyx, the protective layer, is carbohydrates from refined grains and sugars. So we substituted one destroyer of the glycocalyx with another one that's worse. And so people are now, and then that's why the obesity rate graph is going like this. And, heart disease is just going out the roof. I was discussing that with Dr. Philip Ovadia when I was on with him, your colleague and carnivore friend.
Mhm.
And yeah, so it's just amazing. So see, the grains really help. I think they exacerbate the infiltration. The small dense cell. What happens in a heart attack is after you eat all of these small dense LDL foods that lead to the small dense LDL, they invade the artery wall through transcytosis. They get stuck in what's called the intima media space. They build up plaque over time after it takes friendly fire from the immune system, and you get foam cells and macrophages, and it builds up this soft, inflamed plaque. At some point in a future stress moment, whether it's physical stress, emotional stress, or both, that inflamed liquid plaque can rupture through the already damaged artery wall, spills into the lumen where the blood flows, touches blood, creates a clot. It breaks off and goes downstream, so to speak. And if it goes to your heart, you have a heart attack. And if it goes to your brain, you have a stroke. And so that's the short story of what a heart attack is. And they're created by these small, dense LDL particles, mostly from the grains. Sugars are a couple too, of course.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, and that's even if it's if these cholesterol molecules like the small dense LDL particles are contributing to that, they wouldn't exist if we weren't eating grains and sugar and carbs and things like that too, because they're getting glycated and damaged. And so if we have this just a large, buoyant, fluffy LDL that we make on purpose because it's part of our biological design and helps with the immune system, helps with wound healing, and nutrient transport around the body, that's not going to cause any of those problems. And so, and that's the thing too. It's interesting. Recent studies have shown that type 2 diabetes increases your risk of developing heart disease by 1,000%. Metabolic syndrome, which is sort of, it can be accompanied by diabetes. They usually go hand in hand, increases by 600%. SDLDL, small dense LDL, it's only 70%. And the thing is that the diabetes things that cause the diabetes and metabolic syndrome are causing the SDLDL to form as well. So it's all part of the same package. And so you do the same thing that gets rid of all that. You go onto a ketogenic diet, you eat whole foods, you cut out the seed oils, sugars, grains, things like that. You just eat normal food and all that goes away. And we have clinical trials showing that, and more clinicians are using that effectively in their patient population, to the extent that ketogenic diets have now been classified as best practice for treating type 2 diabetes in Australia. So,
Oh my
we are
God, that's
making some headway.
fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean,
Oh,
that's
wow.
mainstream medicine now, right? But everyone's, oh my God, this ketogenic thing, that's bullshit. Like, okay,
Ah,
well, you're just a little behind the times, you know? Hey everyone, really happy to announce a new sponsor for the show and for everybody down in Australia. It's Stockman Steaks, who are delivering high quality grass-fed and finished pasture-raised beef and other meats, flash frozen and vacuum sealed to your door, something that I've been enjoying a lot of myself recently as well. They also have a great range of specialty items such as high-fat keto mince and carnivore beef and organs mince with liver, kidneys, and beef heart as well. So use code Chaffee today for a free order of beef mince or another specialty gift along with your order at stockmansteaks.com.au, and I'll see you over there. Thanks, guys.
I'm
And
telling you.
yeah, and
I got to
so
tell you, well, listen, one of my comorbidities, and Dr. Joseph Kraft back in the 70s discovered
yeah,
this, the Kraft insulin survey guy, and he,
mm,
from doing thousands of autopsies, he discovered that you can't have heart disease without having some degree of diabetic physiology.
yeah,
It's just the way it is. And he was proved right, decades
mm,
later. And turns out, hey, that was me.
mm,
Usually the first sign or symptom that you have type 2 diabetes, or, at least pre-diabetes, is that you're overweight, right? You got a
mm,
belly. You're there if you've got that. And I didn't have that. I was one of the 1% that could be on the slim side, and still be a raging type 2 diabetic. That was me. And that was the source root cause of my cardiovascular disease and my NAFLD, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. But how could I have that? I don't drink, no drugs. I mean, I'm already silly enough, right? And so it turns out that it was this stuff called high fructose corn syrup. Who knew?
mm, mm,
Because in the morning, I would have a whole grain granola that had to have at least 60 or 70 grams of
jeez,
carbohydrates. And I'm sure it had some high fructose corn syrup, some HFCS. And then for lunch, I'd have two whole grain pieces of bread with, low fat turkey breast, right? Of course, low fat. So I was into all of it, and I'm just like the regular person. I didn't know. I mean, you think that, well, if it was bad for me in the supermarket, if these food were bad for me, they wouldn't be for sale, right?
Hmm.
Because attorneys would get involved.
Yeah.
But it's not.
They
It's
wouldn't let it happen. It's like, who's they? Exactly.
oh
I,
my God, I got to tell you, and the doctors, they just don't get the education, as you well stated. They
yeah.
just don't learn this. In fact, I moved about 2 years ago, and I wanted to get a an echocardiogram because I like to get one of those once a year to keep an eye on my ejection fraction. And so I went to this cardiologist just to get that, right? And I said, yeah, well, I got my labs. It looks look great and everything. And the first question he said was, so how's your LDL?
Mm.
And I didn't roll my eyes. I wanted to, but I said, yeah, well, it's out the roof, but I'm in superior metabolic health. My HDL's 96, my triglycerides are 38, and I went on and all that way. And I said, I'm a lean mass hyperresponder. Anyway, he was looking at me like I had two heads. He didn't know what I was talking about.
Yeah.
I'm trying to explain to him the whole cholesterol theory, and it's really been disproven in that, but he wasn't hearing it because he's
Well,
in a practice and he's
he,
subscribing to all of the now I'm supposed to's.
yeah.
Patient comes in, he's got high LDL. You get a script for a torvastatin, right? 80 milligrams. Oh, by the way, I have a whole chapter on statins, chapter 18. Oh my God. Uh,
Yeah.
like you said, I heard you say one time that it's been the biggest cash cow ever for big
Yeah.
pharma. It's just pretty amazing. But I got to tell you, so I was a type 2 diabetic. I had NAFLD, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and the cardiovascular disease. And I also had this osteoporosis, which I have a whole chapter on, chapter 13. And one of the first studies I cover in that chapter is how it's arriving at younger and younger ages. They're finding it. There was this one study between 35 and 50 people with osteopenia and osteoporosis. And it's because of the onslaught of the unholy trinity, the carbs, the sugar, and the oils. And people, there's no education on any of this, and that's why
Mhm.
really wanted to get this book out there, and I'm thrilled that it's been doing well and that kind of thing. So
That's
anyway,
good.
those were my four comorbidities, and I should tell you about talk about corruption. You know about the ischemia trial from anyway, there was this large government funded trial, $100 million, and involved 5,179 patients, two groups. One group, they gave invasive procedures, CABG, which is coronary artery bypass graft, or PCI, percutaneous coronary intervention, which is one or more stents. The other group, they sent them in the direction of lifestyle.
Mm.
Lose 30 pounds, get back to the gym, stop eating the Fritos and all that kind of stuff, right? And they followed them closely for 4 years. And at the end of the 4 years, they found that there was no difference in outcomes.
Wow.
The ischemia trial failed to show that these invasive procedures were any good at preventing heart attacks and strokes.
Mm.
And then came the Orbita trial with the same thing, and the Courage trial. There were big failures, and it rocked the cardiology community. And I asked the reader in the book, I said, okay, so after all these failures, do you think the graph would start to slow down on the doing of all of these invasive procedures? It's like this. It's going
Hmm.
out the roof. Now, they are, to be clear, they are life-saving interventions in
Hmm.
emergency situations. Person's having a heart attack or there's something that comes up in the hospital, it's emergency. But that's only 15% of the time. The other 85% of the time, they're done for prevention. And these studies prove that they don't work for prevention. So I tell the reader in the book, I say, look, if your doctor's suggesting one of these procedures, show him these studies, then he'll know that you know. And then you ask him, so explain to me again why you think I should do this.
Yeah. Well, it
Anyway,
was
it's just,
well, it was bad too because, to your point, most doctors are actually do care about their patients. They want to do the right
yeah,
thing. Oth-
absolutely.
Others maybe not so much, because like I mean, we talk about, doctors certainly back in the day, doctors were the people going around dissecting little, forest creatures and things like that. probably a bit something wrong with them. And there's just like these just sociopaths like mixing in society. Whether that's true or not, that was sort of the impression people got. But you
Right.
know, people are people, and some people have poor motivations. They get into medicine for the wrong reasons. And if you want to make money, just go into business, make way more money than you'll ever make in medicine. I mean, it's so much easier too to like it's just the hoops you have to jump through to go through medicine and actually start making money 20 years down the road is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And maybe not that long, but in some parts of the world it is that long because it's a much longer
Yeah.
training period. And so I was at a conference in England last year, and there's a panel of cardiologists and lipidologists and things like that. And we're talking about this, and the moderator was an interventional cardiologist, and he was all about prevention, about preventing heart disease and trying to like what can we do to prevent heart disease. And he was talking to a colleague of his about that, to another interventionalist, and the colleague of his, this is a you know board certified, interventional cardiologist in the UK, um, who said, I don't want to try to prevent heart disease. Like, that's my business. Like, I want there to be more heart disease. I want to do more procedures. I want to do more stents because I make more money that way. That's my business. My business is that. And that, I mean, that guy should have lost his license. I mean, that's disgusting. Like you
He
don't
actually said that out loud.
said that. He said that out loud to this other cardiologist. It's like, I don't want to prevent heart disease. I want more heart disease so I can make more money and do more procedures. It's absolutely sick. I mean, you think about that, what that means. You're talking about the preponderance of human. It's not like he's the only one doing these procedures. Everyone's doing procedures. He's getting a small percentage of that. So you have to massively expand heart disease across the population, call it millions and millions and millions more people dying prematurely and suffering along the way so that he can get, a few more a week, right? And so he can make more money. And then the amount of money those things cost, those things can be, $10,000, $12,000 per stent. And so you're putting in three, four, five stents. He's getting what, $1,000 for that? you know? And so you're costing people, you're costing the system, you're costing insurance and everything else, tens of thousands of dollars so you can make and millions of people, millions more people getting heart disease and suffering so you can get an extra grand, you know?
It's
Like I
just
mean,
amazing. It's just
what's
like I
wrong
said.
with your brain, Like you're
It's
happy with
just
that so that you can make a couple extra grand a week, you know?
yeah. It's just a shame when you look at it from a human standpoint. The total opposite of that is our colleague Dr. Philip Ovadia.
Mm,
His book is "Stay Off My Operating Table."
that's it.
Right? I mean, that's a
Yeah.
total opposite. And he's trying to get people aware, like you are and I am, to not eat these things. And it's all money because oh
Yeah.
boy, back in the 80s, as you probably know, smoking was starting to go down. And so the big tobacco companies looked around and thought, okay, so where are we going to get our money from if smoking is going down? They bought up the big food companies. They bought Kraft, General Foods, Nabisco, and they brought their addiction scientists from the big tobacco companies over to the big food companies. And when I say addiction scientists, I'm not talking about scientists to get you unaddicted.
Mm.
It's the reverse of how do we get the person to eat the whole bag instead of half the bag?
Yeah.
What are the ingredients that we can include that will stimulate the opiate receptors of the brain, same opiate receptors as heroin and morphine, but instead it doesn't relieve pain or get you high. It makes you crave more of the thing. So I understand when people have a hard time making the transition. That's why I tell them, look, do little by little and go at your own pace. But try to do it as quickly as you can because the more you do put those things in your body, you're going to crave them more and more.
Yeah.
Because carbs don't stimulate. I'm sorry, carbs don't satisfy appetite; they stimulate it. Right? Carbs don't satisfy appetite; they stimulate it. That's
Hmm.
why when you eat a bunch of pasta, you're hungry in an hour, or you eat a couple slices of pizza, you can't stop. That pizza crust is you still want to put it in there. And it's just pretty amazing and that way. And so I'm just again, just trying to encourage people. See, my biggest regret is having to have this life-threatening event to place me on this path.
Mm,
Um, I would rather just continue have been an entrepreneur, which I was, and not have to do this. But I see it how it's helping so many people now that it's an international bestseller. I'm hearing from people all over the world. I mean, you don't make much money selling health and wellness books, believe me,
mhm,
no matter how well it does. It's just I become wealthy in my heart when I hear from people that, wow, this has changed my life. Da, da, da. Same thing that you get all the time, I'm sure, in your YouTube feeds and success stories that I'm sure you get all the time.
yeah. Oh, it is amazing. I
That's the
mean,
reward.
it is. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I I made my YouTube channel just because I wanted to get certain things out there and I wanted them said in a certain way. And I almost didn't do it because there are people like Dr. Baker and so on that were saying the things that I thought were important to say. But I thought, well, I sort of, maybe I'll just do it. Maybe I'm late to the game. There's already people out there talking about this sort of stuff. And I was just happy with that. I just wanted the information out there for people. And so I thought there was probably, you know, a little too late for me to get in because, it's already sort of out there. But, I decided that I wanted to sort of, put in my 2 cents. And I'm glad I did because people started saying like, wow, I've heard this stuff before, but the way you presented it, it made sense to me. And then that makes perfect sense too, because I may listen to someone and be like, oh, that makes sense. Or listen to someone else. It could be saying the same information, but it doesn't quite hit. And so, they might say something to someone else and they're like, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. And then someone else might say it in a different way, like it's very similar information, but presented in a different way, or maybe make a couple little points and insights that are unique to them that someone says like, okay, that makes sense now, and they start doing that. And that's why I encourage so many people. It's not me. I'm not special. It's just that, the way I say it is going to resonate with certain people that may not, that other people may not resonate with. And so that's why I try to encourage people like yourself and everyone else. It's like we need to get more voices out there because everyone's going to say this and present this in a slightly different manner. And it's going to make more sense to people, from that. And so I sort of realized that. But my whole point, I just want to get this information out there. I sort of did all the videos that I wanted to, talking about the different topics that I thought were important. And I sort of went like, I'm sort of done. I sort of said everything I wanted to say personally. And, maybe I should just leave it. I didn't want to like clog up my YouTube channel with a whole bunch of videos that were just, nonsense. And I would drown out the ones that I thought were the most important. And so I was thinking about just stopping that, but then I had, more opportunities to interview people like yourself and more people reached out. And then there were people that like I really wanted to talk to. And so I just started doing more interviews and things like that as well. And that became very helpful. And so I've continued on with it. But, you know, that was that was the main thing. But, by doing that, I've had people seeing these results and seeing people saying, hey, when I did this, I weighed this much, I had these issues, I had all these problems, and now all these things are gone. I've lost 80 pounds, all these sorts of things. Now my family's doing it. My wife is, reversed her diabetes and her this and her that and her autoimmunity, and our kids are doing better. All these things, and we see it all the time. 90%, 95% of the comments on my videos are like that. And so then people, so I started at first, I'm like, oh, do I really want to keep doing this? But then when I was just seeing these comments about how many people have been benefited by this, like how do you stop? I mean, how do you just say like, screw it,
Don't stop, brother. We need you out there. I'm telling you, all this
well,
information
you
is
can't.
incredible,
Yeah.
especially because you're a clinician, you're a doctor. I don't have any
Yeah.
of your experience. Well, my knowledge, I know a lot now, but
Mhm.
it's dwarfed by what you know. And so please don't stop that. At least maybe see, I'm just a lower class street kid from Philly, right? And I'm rough around the edges. And there's that old saying, you can take the kid out of Philly, but you can't take the Philly out of the kid. So that's me. And,
Yeah.
I just thought, well, I'm just going to get on there and speak to people anyway, because maybe they can relate. Maybe they have heart disease in their genetics. Their parents had it, their grandparents had it. And that's coming your way unless you get off the unholy Trinity and start, getting back to the gym, doing some exercise, that kind of thing. Um, it's just really important. And I'm there with you, brother, because we need you. So great that you not stopped doing that because it's fantastic.
Well, you can't really, like, I mean, people saying, "Oh, yeah, please don't stop." I'm like, I couldn't, even if I wanted to. Like, it takes a lot of time and effort and things like that, and it takes away from work and things. But it's, you can help a lot more people this way. In my practice, I see people one on one, and that's great, and get more hands-on, care, and we're looking deeply into their blood work and all their different sorts of issues, and we can do a lot of good for a lot of people. But when you're blasting this out to the population at large and getting these videos out to people, you can just help a lot more people, and so yeah, you really can't stop.
We really need it because here's a shocking statistic. You probably know about this. There was a study
Mhm.
just a few years ago out of Johns Hopkins, and they discovered that 74% of doctors, I mean, this exacerbates the situation we're in, right? 74% of doctors they found. Now we're talking general practitioners, family physicians, internists, and cardiologists. 74% do not know how to properly diagnose and test for prediabetes or type 2
Mhm.
diabetes. It's like, what? Are you kidding me? That's our biggest epidemic. I call it the gateway disease because once you get there and you're
Mhm.
pre-diabetic or full type 2 diabetic, and most people that are diabetic don't know it because there's so many people that can test normal because most doctors, what they're doing, as you know, they'll test A1C, fasting A1C, and fasting blood glucose. And even the American Diabetes Association, who I wouldn't trust as far as I could throw them, even they say, hey, if you just do those two, you're going to miss a lot of people because there's a lot of people that can test normal for those two, like I did, and still be a raging type 2 diabetic like I was. They don't do the OGTT with insulin. This goes back to Dr.
Mhm.
Joseph Kraft that we talked about earlier. Oral glucose tolerance test with insulin, because that way, that's how I discovered it. I was on my first hour, I was well beyond 200. And it
Mhm.
was like, holy moly, I had no idea. And then I had to start looking at my diet and everything. And, I have all that on my website, by the way, for anybody who wants to know about the tests. What are the most important tests? DanielTrevor.com. And just to get the information, I mean, you can order them there too, because I made a deal with Quest Diagnostics, which have thousands of locations all over the United States. But you don't have to get it from me. I'm not selling anything. I don't have powders or vitamins or anything like that, which is fine. I mean, I don't mind anybody does that. Um, it's just that I would rather see people just get the tests or use this as a reference and go, hey, doc, I'd like to get these inflammation markers. I need to know what my myeloperoxidase and my LP plaque 2 is, and to find out if I got this smoking, I call them smoke detectors because those are blood tests that, and also MACR, microalbumin creatinine ratio. They can tell if you've got the soft inflamed plaque in your arteries. Because if you don't do that, then at least you should at least get a CAC scan score, CAC, coronary artery calcium score, or a CIMT, carotid intima media thickness test. And so that you know what's going on. There's some great, in my chapter 19, I go into the difference between soft, dangerous plaque and the calcified plaque. What is the difference? Aren't they both dangerous? No. This is new science too. You'd appreciate this. There was a Honda study published in JACC, Journal of the American College of Cardiology, top cardiology place on the planet, and they showed the people that had echolucent plaque, which is that's the soft dangerous plaque, and the people that had echogenic plaque, which is the calcified plaque. All the events, heart attacks and strokes, were coming from the soft plaque, not the calcified plaque. And so it's the soft plaque that causes the heart attacks and strokes. However, in that next section, I tell what the Cleveland Clinic, which is the top, the rank number one globally for cardiovascular care, they discovered that, and again, this is just a few years ago, which in your industry, that's like 10 minutes ago, right? Because it takes so long for new science to get down to the front lines of the doctors, let alone how long it gets to the, curriculum of the schools. And they say that the soft plaque is the dangerous plaque. If you have calcified plaque, there's 4 times as much soft, dangerous, inflamed plaque than there is the calcified plaque. So it is a good test to get because if you have an elevated score, as you know, it's supposed to be between 0 and 400, and it can go way higher than that too. Uh, but the body, as you heal, it lays down calcium. And so what can happen is as you spend a year going low carb, keto, carnivore, exercise, that kind of thing, your score can go up. And that's what the science has shown. They call it the there was several studies, JAMA Cardiology and Cleveland Clinic and another place I can't remember. They call it the CAC paradox.
Hmm.
Now, the doctors and researchers involved in the study, it wasn't a paradox to them, but they knew it would be puzzling for the patient. They go, wait a minute. I've been killing it this last year. I've been, getting like a 6-pack, and how can my score go up? What happens is the body releases calcium to heal all of the lesions that are created by the soft, inflamed, dangerous plaque, and it stabilizes the plaque. And so
Hmm.
there are no events but then you verify that I'm the perfect example of that. When I first got my CAC scan, it was an abysmal 600, right? And I thought, okay, I'm going to get into this. I've got my low carb people. And then I wound up in carnivore. I'm at the gym. I got a 6-pack now. HDL's 96 and my triglycerides 38, and, A1C's 5.1. Everything was beautiful metabolically. But my CAC my score went from 600 to 2,500, which is about 4 times as much. And that's because of all of the healing that I needed. This particular current meat body that I have, I needed that healing. And that's the reason why. So don't freak out. I tell the reader in the book, don't freak out if your score goes up. Just verify that you're in good shape by all these other tests.
Hmm.
Thought I'd add
Yeah,
that in there too.
yeah, no, definitely. And there's a couple things I wanted to ask as well. Um, you mentioned the glycocalyx, and I've seen studies like that as well, where, after, I mean, within a couple of hours after eating carbohydrates and refined carbohydrates and sugar in particular, it destroys the glycocalyx. And you can actually see this in real time. It's sort of getting less fuzzy and less fuzzy, and then it's flat as you don't have that protection.
It's
And
worse
uh,
than
and then it,
smoking.
yeah, and it can come back, but if you keep hitting it with carbs all the time,
Pounding.
it's just constantly destroyed. So if you're doing the recommendations, I mean, let's say you're doing intermittent fasting with carbs. Okay, you destroy the glycocalyx, but it would rebuild. But if you're eating, oh, you need to have, 3 meals a day and 3 snacks and all that sort of garbage, and most of this is high carbohydrate, like it's never recovering. And so you don't have that defense. And I was taught in medical school that nicotine itself, one of the damaging things from smoking was just the nicotine. So even if you're having a nicotine patch, nicotine gum, or an e-cigarette or whatever, that itself directly damages the arterial lining. And so they didn't mention the glycocalyx at the time. I don't even know if they knew about it back in 2009 when they were teaching us that. But either way, nicotine could damage the lining of the arteries. And I do wonder about this. Is that is the nicotine itself damaging the glycocalyx, or is it causing specific damage? And there's all these studies. We've had there's people saying that, well, if you look at the evidence, seed oils are actually really good for you. And it's just like, okay, which studies are you looking at? Because there's a lot of industry funded studies and research, and some of it's industry funded, and we don't know that it's industry funded because they don't actually have an ethics, ethical, compass. They're trying to sell a product. And,
Yes.
so the sugar company's been doing this, the tobacco companies have been doing this, and other companies have been doing this to push their product. They pay people under the table or, silently, and they don't discuss it. And so they do this research, supposedly independent research, but it's definitely not. And, We had that with the sugar companies and cholesterol. So we also had that with the tobacco industry. And now you've got all these studies coming out and people saying, well, nicotine is actually really good for you. It's nootropic. It turns your brain on. It's all these health issues and benefits. And I heard one guy say that it can melt GBM tumors in 2 days. I'm like, really? Because, I've had patients with GBM who smoked. So why wasn't that melting their GBM or preventing it from ever happening in the first place?
They need to talk
So,
to Thomas Seyfried.
well, yeah, there's that. And, I mean, certainly toxins can be used as medicine, but, I mean, really, like, you know, so the thing with nicotine I'm curious about is like we still have these big tobacco companies. They're still the largest companies in the world. Now they own all the, Kraft and all these massive food giants. So they're the biggest food giants,
Exactly.
are also the tobacco giants. And so there's some of the, this really undercover wealthiest organizations on planet Earth, and they have been for decades. And, sure, the tech companies are massive now as well, but these own commerce. They're all the processed food and vices and things like that. I mean, they've got a stranglehold on that. And so now all of a sudden you see all these studies coming out about how great nicotine is all of a sudden. I'm like, I'm the cynic in
Uh,
me saying like this has to be coming from them. Like I don't
no,
see
it's
how this
true.
could possibly be.
It's when the whole thing of the money, it's just,
Hmm.
you probably saw this, it was several years ago. Goldman Sachs,
Yeah.
they had one of their analysts do a white paper, and I can't remember the name of it. What it was about, creating cures is not good for the bottom line.
Yeah.
And the example they gave was, the big pharma company Gilead Sciences came up
Hmm.
with this blockbuster drug called Harvoni, which had a 96 to 99% cure rate for hepatitis C.
Yeah. I remember
And
when that
what
came
happened?
out.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what happened? It came out, it was like $12 billion, and then within a couple of years, it was down 75%, and it continued its descent after that.
Mm.
Goldman Sachs yelled at Gilead Sciences, says, "No, don't do that. We don't want that." So what they would rather have had them do is come up with a pill that the patient could take once a day for the rest of their life, or an infusion once a week or once a month. That way the profit model is over the entire lifetime.
Yeah.
We don't want
It's
to get
just
rid of
sick.
cures.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
It's insane. It's that
Yeah.
mentality. Just the same as that ischemia trial and all those that we were talking about earlier. There's no way that the board of directors or the CEO of the hospitals or the cardiology clinic are going to want to see all that revenue disappear, because that's how they build the new wing for the
Yeah.
hospital. And that, if that disappeared, there goes the beach house and the kids in Ivy League and the, Mercedes down to Wakia. I mean, it would just all change, and we can't have that.
Yeah. Well,
Just
and
like a
it,
lot of
yeah.
people in Washington D.C. right now are living off all that kind of stuff, off of
Mm,
other types of money graft and so on. But anyway,
yeah. Well, that's the thing too, is that I mean, that's really ghoulish, I mean, they're turning people into things and cattle, really. There's just like, how do we profit off of these people? How do we make more money off these people? Like you're destroying people's lives.
yeah.
And so saying, no, we don't want to cure people of disease. We want to just have them treated for the disease so we can milk them and take more of their money over time. I mean, that in itself is, that's the behavior of a con artist. You're someone who's not trying to provide a good product. You're not trying to actually do something worthwhile. You're trying to screw people over and get money out of them because you just want their money. You don't care that it's damaging their health. I mean,
Yeah, and
that's
I can
sick.
understand how certain doctors, and I'm sure I was just talking to a doctor friend of mine last week. He says, Daniel, I can tell people to do this and stop doing that, but they don't listen to me. I says,
Yeah.
okay. So and so a lot of people have not reached a state of need of change and demand of improvement of themselves. And sometimes they need to go through a life threatening event like I did to wake up and to take the dive. And I was fortunate to be able to, you know, take the dive into the science because I'm used to studying technical data all my life. So, but people just don't have the education. There's just no So that was the impetus behind the book because,
Yeah.
there's so many doctors, they try and and a lot of doctors, I feel, because I've gotten to know so many, they can't be the doctor that they first set out to be, right? Because they're working in a system that they have bosses, they got to, do this by that, and they got 7 minutes to see each patient, and they have all this computer work to do and so on. So, um, I feel for some of them, and but then there's others like you're talking about where it's just downright ghoulish.
Yeah.
Right?
Hey guys, just want to take a second to thank our sponsor, the Carnivore Bar. I don't promote many products because honestly, all you need to be healthy is to just eat meat. For those times that you're out hiking, road tripping, or stuck at work and you want a nutritious snack that is just meat, fat, and salt if you want it, the Carnivore Bar is a great option. So I like this product not because it's just pure meat, but also because I want the carnivore market to thrive as well. And the more we support meat-only products, the more meat-only products there will be available in the mainstream. So if this sounds like something you'd like to get behind, check it out using my discount code Anthony to get 10% off, which also applies to subscriptions, giving you 25% off total. All right, thanks guys. What, and the thing is too, is that the doctors aren't given the education either because we're educated by big pharma, and that's the truth of it. I mean, they have their hooks in all the medical institutions all across the world, and residency or resident programs, and the post residency education with drug reps going to the hospitals and educating doctors by talking about cherry picked studies from their company pushing their product, and then going to
Yeah.
conferences that do the same thing. They're funded by the big food and big pharma, and you can bet your ass that like no one's giving a talk there that goes against anything that goes against their bottom line. And the thing is too is that patients, I talk to them every day because this is my whole practice. There's people that are fed up with the same old advice and the same old system. It's not working. It's not helping because doctors going to say like, "Wow, I can tell them about diet and lifestyle," but what are you telling about diet and lifestyle? You're saying eat
Mm.
less, move more. That's it. And you're saying, oh, stay away from fat. Fat makes you fat and all that sort of bullshit. So, yeah, I have no doubt that that doesn't help because the thing is that they think, and I've spoken to a lot of doctors about this, and they say, overweight doctors, by the way, who
Yeah.
say, well, the reason that patients are so fat and sick is because they just don't listen to doctors. And it's like, no, the problem is they did listen to doctors. And the bottom of it, the advice was bad. They're saying eat less, move more, eat less meat, eat less fat, eat more healthy fruits, whole grains, and all that sort of garbage. And it doesn't work. And so they go home and they're getting fatter, they're getting sicker, and they're like, no one listens. No one listens. I told them what to do, and they didn't do it,
Yeah. Well,
but they did
I
do it.
think, I think they think that the science is settled, like they say,
Mm,
settled science and all that. I'm thinking, whenever you hear anybody say,
no such thing. Yeah.
the settled science, just know that what you're
Yeah.
about to hear is about as truthful as the COVID jab is safe and effective for everyone, and it
Mm,
totally stops transmission.
yeah.
We know what a
Yeah.
bunch of bullshit that was, right? So, I think they get these certain conclusions, so to speak, in their minds, and that okay, so it's you have to eat low fat, high carbs, the grains. That's what we got to do because Jesus ate the grains, and that was But they don't know the
Mhm.
whole history of the grains, which you know, they don't know
Mhm.
that wheat raises the blood sugar higher than a Snickers bar.
Mhm.
Wheat. I never knew that. I see. I
Mhm.
this all this stuff blew my mind. Right. I didn't know, and I very early on in the book, in fact, page 2 of the of chapter 1, I explain. I say, look, you have to understand the two most fundamental players in the processing of the food that you put in your mouth, and that's glucose, also known as blood sugar, and insulin. You eat something, your glucose goes up. The pancreas senses that, and it secretes some insulin to bring it down, keep it in a normal range. And that's a normal process that goes on through life. But when you're eating the wrong foods hour after hour, day after day, week after week, and your insulin and your blood glucose stays elevated, you're going to develop insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia. Hyperinsulinemia, that's just a fancy technical term for hyper, too much, insulin. Emia means in the blood. That's for your audience, hyperinsulinemia. And then comes your prediabetes and type 2 diabetes and all the inflammation. And then what happens is that inflammation then goes through your arterial system, your cardiovascular system, and then turns on whatever you've got lurking in your genetics that mom and dad
Mhm.
had and that grandpa and grandpa had, and it turns it all that on. That's why it's so clearly what I've called a gateway disease. You know, that's what turns it all on. This
Mhm.
and we've never had that throughout history, right?
Mhm. Yeah, no, definitely not. So I was going to ask you as well. I mean, you call us the unholy Trinity. So, why is that? Do these things work synergistically together to screw us up, or are they just all bad and we see them together a lot?
They're individually bad. And then if
Mhm.
you look at the list of things, in fact, I got a great quote from Nina Teicholz in there about how in her out of her book,
Mhm.
her book was this classic 2014 Big Fat Surprise: Why Butter, Meat, and Cheese Belong in a Healthy Diet. And she was the one that was at the forefront, her and Dr. Chris Kenobi and Dr. Kate Shanahan, that showed like it's not the fat. The fat is good for you. It's what
Mhm.
we've eaten for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. Proven by these, like I said before, anthropologists and bioarchaeologists. They've proven, I think it's a lot longer than this, but they say it's at least 2.6 to 4.5 million. And, you know, there's this thing, as you know, they're called the species adaptation hypothesis. And that's basically says that when a certain species is used to eating a certain way for a long damn time, that becomes their healthy diet. Just like the cows
Yeah.
eating the grass and the goats and so forth. Um, and our healthy diet was animals, what we could catch,
Yeah.
kill, and eat. And, um, and of course, other things when we were, and they use grains as fallback food.
Yeah.
Again, the anthropologist and bioarchaeologist. I have a picture of a guy in chapter 10. It's called "Are You a Wheat Addict?" And there's this guy. Well, it's his skull. It's from 100,000 years ago, and he's got perfect teeth. And I asked, "Well, you think you had an orthodontist floss twice a day and all this?" No. And what they did was after they started eating wheat and grains, see what they found out clever humans discovered that if they could grind up the seeds from the grains, because that's where the grains come from, the seeds, not from the stalks or anything, and they added some water, heated it up, they could make something like a porridge, and that allowed them to survive an extra day, week, month. But they took a serious toll
Mm.
on their physiology and everything. They tooth decay, missing teeth because they started exhuming bodies from after that point of 10,000
Mhm.
years ago, 9,000 years ago or so. That's when agricultural societies came in. And and they could see that all these new diseases, I mean, not as bad as the last 100 years,
Yeah.
but you know, bone diameter and length shrunk. Men shrunk 5 inches, women shrunk 3 inches. I mean, it was just a disaster. And
Mhm.
then in the late 60s, early 70s, big ag came along, and you know, it's always grown to shoulder height, right? They came up with this thing called chemical mutagenesis and radiation mutagenesis, and that shrunk it down to 18 inches. They call it semi-dwarf wheat. And what that does is they get bigger seeds, and that gives them a more bountiful crop. That's why they did
Mhm.
that. But what it does is it amps up this protein from gluten called gliadin, Gliadin, gliadin. And what does that do? That attaches to the opiate receptors of the brain. I mean, it doesn't, like, again, it doesn't get you high or relieve pain, but it turns on the same opiate receptors as morphine and heroin. And its expression is to make you crave more of the things that have wheat and grains in them. Like, that's why, check out this stat. The average supermarket has 60,000 products. Right?
Yes.
59,000 contain wheat or some form of
Mm.
wheat. I have
Wow.
all the aliases in there too to look out for in chapter 10. Even Twizzlers, the candy, the second ingredient is wheat. It's like, what? They're really
Yeah.
coming after our opiate
That would be
receptors. And so
plastic.
it's
Yeah.
just it's that money thing again, right?
Yeah. Well, it is, and it's they make a lot of money, and there's a big markup. And just like the statins, that's been the highest grossing drug that's been on the market. And so, I mean, you're gonna pry that out of their cold dead fingers. They're not gonna give that up. They're not gonna give up. Now the statins are off patent. They don't really care as much anymore. But now you got the PCSK9 inhibitors, and so these really dramatically drop your serum cholesterol. And so I've spoken to cardiologists about this, and they were saying that now the drug reps are really pushing for the PCSK9 inhibitors. They're not even pushing for the statins anymore because they want the new on-patent drugs for people to use because they make more money on that. And so because they drop things so much, they are now pushing to lower the cholesterol threshold again. And
Oh my
so,
God.
yeah, and so it's
Oh
just
my
like we need to
God.
be even lower, even lower, even lower. And this what does this do? This qualifies more people to be on more aggressive drugs. And so because they just want more money, and this is
Yeah,
this
that's
is
what a
clearly
doctor
causing
was
harm.
telling me that in 1950, I think the cholesterol, normal cholesterol was below 300. Now
Yeah,
it's below 200, and now they're going to lower it again, like you're saying. Oh my God,
yeah,
that's what's really going to. Oh, it's
yeah,
just horrible. Wow.
yeah, yeah. Well, and same with blood pressure. It used to be under 140 was normal, then under 130, now under 120. And I've spoken to some people, and they're starting to hear people talking, come reps, oh, we really should get it under 110. And it's just like because you're going to bring in tens of millions of more people that now qualify for these drugs. I've some, 117 over 70. Ooh, I don't really like that. Oh, we need to get you on some blood pressure meds. And yeah, and it's just a way to sell more drugs. I mean, this is a drug cartel. They're the biggest drug
Uh,
cartels in the world because they're actually legal. This is the opium trade. Back when I mean, people made empires off the opium trade. I mean, they bought islands and nations based on that. And now this is the same thing. It's a legal drug trade. It's a legal drug cartel. They're selling drugs. Some of these things have legitimate uses and really do save people's lives. Others don't. And their motivations are not to help people. Their motivations are to make money. And so they want to make as much money as they can. Well, we have a fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders. Well, you actually first and foremost have a responsibility to these patients. You do not get to cause harm in order to make money. So okay, so if I have a team of people and like, well, what we're going to do is we're going to go and try to make as much money as we can. And you can buy shares in our company, this, that, and the other. And what we do is we hire a bunch of black ops people to knock over banks and we rob banks. And if we have to shoot people and kill people because that gets us in and out fast enough, and then we can make more money, I have a fiduciary responsibility to shoot out those people because my shareholders need more money. It's just like, no, 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 dickhead. You don't get to hurt people in order to do that. You have to
uh,
first make a product that is a good product and not cause harm. If you're knowingly causing harm, if you're knowingly putting somebody on a drug that, I mean, if that's the only option, then fine, you know, but intentionally stifling innovation that can actually cure a disease because it affects your bottom line, or putting out false information and lying and paying people to put out studies to say that your product is a really good idea, or that cholesterol is really bad and we need to treat it, knowing that it's causing harm, knowing that it's wrong. That's criminal behavior. And just like any sort of war criminal and somebody make human rights violators, you should be in prison. I mean, some of these things are like bordering Nuremberg sort of level
yeah, well,
criminality. You
it,
know that your product is causing harm. Like, I mean, the tobacco companies, they knew that their product was causing harm for 30 years, and
right.
yet they lied and put out studies saying that it didn't, and it was actually good for you, or at least didn't cause harm. And then we know that they're lying, so they got fined $400 billion. Okay,
That
that's
was
a lot of money.
1994. That was
Yeah,
1994. They brought him
yeah,
before Congress. Oh
hmm
no, Mr. Congressman, we never intentionally put
hmm
addicting carcinogenic
yeah.
material chemicals in our products.
Yeah, but they
Uh,
did, and we know that now. And what happened? Did they go to prison? Because did they go to prison for the mass murder of
no,
hundreds of millions of people around the world? No. And
no.
until
Now
they
they
do,
own
it's
Kraft
going to
and
continue.
Nabisco and General Foods.
Mhm.
Now that's how they're getting people eliminated. So
That's
it's
it.
just it really.
Yeah,
I think people have a low confront of um, the ability to confront evil. It's
yeah,
not a high ability in most people. They just, oh no, they wouldn't do that.
yeah,
No, my Uncle Joe works for them. That couldn't be. And
yeah,
it's just, but there's that old saying
yeah,
from what was it? I love this guy, Mark Twain.
mm,
The
yeah.
common sense philosopher from the 1800s, and he
That
said
is great.
it's easier to fool people than to convince them they have been fooled. It's
Yeah,
easier to fool people than to convince them, hey, you've been fooled, pal.
yeah, yeah,
It's
definitely.
just wild. It's just wild.
Yeah. Well, people say, oh, they wouldn't do that. It's like, I'm sure people thought that in Nazi Germany as well. And
Oh,
guess what? They were doing these things and they're still doing these things. I mean, there are horrible, evil things going on around the world right now, but we live in such a protected environment that we think that microaggressions are the worst thing that ever happened to human, civilization. Is this like try going to an actual war-torn country or a place where there are actual genocides happening right now. They are still happening. We just don't hear about them. But there are genocides happening. I went and helped with the survivors of a genocide in Burma in 2017,
I read
2018.
about that. I read that you
And
did that. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, and when I was there, I was working with a lot of people that did this as a profession. They went from disaster to disaster to disaster. And the amount of horrors that I heard that were going on in the world right now that I had never heard of. And I watch the news. You try to stay informed. That's the Mark Twain quote again. If you don't read the news, then you're uninformed. If you do read the news, you're misinformed. And so
Exactly.
and that was it. And you just don't see this stuff. And I was like, how the hell did I miss this? How the hell did I miss this massive genocide? And I couldn't find it anywhere. I couldn't find it anywhere being reported on. And then when I went there, there were just countless of these things all over the world going on at any given time. We just don't hear about them. We just live
Yeah.
in this little bubble.
Yeah.
And that's
Thank you
and
for
I
doing that. And thank you for staying with the whole purpose of enlightening people about from your experience and all the wisdom that you have. And again, you're a clinician. You actually see patients, and it's not anywhere near what I do. I've
mm,
just been a researcher to solve my own problem. But thank you for getting all this information out there and having people like myself on so that we can spread the word about metabolic health.
you're very welcome. Well, I'm glad that you're doing this. I'm glad that more people are coming to this. I'm sorry that you had to have a heart attack before it came to your attention. But that's the thing, you were like you said, you were Mr. Healthy. You were doing all the healthy things, right? So you're the doctor you were mentioning before was saying, just you can't speak to some people, they just don't listen. They do, and you're living proof of that. You did listen. You did all the things that doctor would have recommended to people, and it cost you. Whereas when I talk to people and I say, and I paint out, a similar picture that you paint out in your book, and I say, look, these things cause harm, and here's how, and this is why you want to avoid them. They get it, and they're like, yeah, I don't want to eat that crap. And so then they start doing it, and then it works, and then they
Mm.
get benefits. It's not that they change your diet. Oh, look at your blood marker. Oh, your cholesterol went down. Yay. Well, how do you feel? Okay. They feel like crap. Then their other
Uh.
markers are getting worse and things. Oh, but my cholesterol went down. Hmm. You know,
I
and
know it's just we have a lot of work to do to wake people up. And that's why,
yeah,
I wrote the book. I'm told I'm pretty good at explaining things, complicated science in an easy to understand way. Because I always listen to Einstein would say, if you can't explain something complicated to a fourth grader, then you don't
mhm,
really understand it that well yourself, right? And so I
yeah,
really
good
had
point.
to make sure that I understood what all this meant and what it was and how it related to me. And that's how I was able to get myself better and then be able to explain it in a way that I give analogies and that kind of thing. So, in other words, what I'm trying to say is that the book is written from the viewpoint of one of the victims of false data and fake science foisted upon the populations and the doctors for
Mhm.
70 years. And so, you have to get this information. And I've written it for the average reader of health and wellness. It's not written for doctors or scientists, even though they need it
Mm.
more, but it's written for the average person to go, hey, I have that in my family. Maybe I should look into this. And that's basically what I did there. So, that I'm on the same mission as you. So I'm so glad to hear that you'd like to come join us on this. The thing we spoke about earlier before we, the Maha thing. RFK has this Maha, Make
Yeah,
America Healthy
absolutely.
Again, and for your audience, Eric Berg had reached out to me to join that because he was invited onto that, and he wanted me to ask you if you'd like to
Mhm.
join us to get the word out more about metabolic
Definitely.
health. We're going to go after the dietary guidelines with Nina Teicholz and others that are on the team that you know. So I'm glad you're accepting that challenge
Sure.
or that because he'll give us all his secrets of how to make a video go viral and all that
Mhm.
kind of thing. So and he's been doing it since YouTube started. I think it was
Mhm.
2007 or something. I don't know, but
Yeah, well.
and you're way beyond me than that. You got what, 500,000 subscribers? Holy
Mhm.
moly! I'm way behind that, but at least I have the book to get things out that
Yeah,
way.
definitely. Yeah. Well, I think I think it's great that you're involved with that, and I definitely am interested in that. I think that's another thing too. With this Maha movement, we need to especially with RFK's background in litigation, starting to actually prosecute these guys criminally. I mean, if there's an actual criminal. If they are knowingly putting out harmful products and lying about and putting out misinformation knowingly, like the tobacco companies have, like the sugar companies have, and we know they have because we have their documentation saying they did it. They should be prosecuted criminally. Wow, that was 50 years ago, and all those people are gone now. But you continued it, didn't you, dickhead? And you knew about that. And so
Yeah,
if you're continuing to profit off of that, then obviously you're going to still be no, but they're the ones who lie. Yeah, but then you continued it. You're still putting out a harmful product. You're still harming people with that product, and you're doing it knowingly.
it's
So,
true.
I think,
I was watching his confirmation hearings, and he was saying something like, I've sued these companies, and when you do that, you get a PhD because there's
mm,
discovery, right? You get a
mm,
PhD on how they operate and between the government agencies and the big food companies and that kind of thing. And you see the corruption. It's crystal clear. So I'm so glad that he's
yeah,
it's interesting. Related to that, the end of my chapter 7, Nina Teicholz, speaking of her and her, she started this lobbying group called Nutrition Coalition, and her group and another, they did this study where there was an investigative study into the committee members of the U.S. dietary guidelines because they have them every 5 years. Right now, we're in the 2020 to 2025. And they discovered that 95% of the committee members, 19 out of 20, had COI,
oh,
conflicts of interest, and were receiving financial backing, also known as bribes, from big food and big, Kraft and General Foods and Mead Johnson and these pharma companies. It's just, that people need to become aware of that because we want to change. They just will not accept anything having to do with low carb, keto, that kind of thing. And that's why we're really going to attack that because, as you know, the U.S. dietary guidelines, that's what guides that's in all the prisons, in the schools, in the, elderly homes. And it's just all across the boards and it's causing so much damage to people. And so
yeah.
you know, I'll introduce you to Eric over email. How's that?
That'd be great. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to be respectful of your time, but I also wanted to just get one more question in if you had time.
Yeah, sure.
You mentioned the most important labs, a chapter on most important labs, and you mentioned a couple of them. But what would be some of the things that people could, as a take home? What are some of the things that people should check that they're not checking?
Well, the very first one you want to get because you may be one of the many, many people that have normal fasting glucose and normal A1C, but still be a raging type 2 diabetic and not know it. You need to get the OGTT with insulin or just the OGTT. That's oral glucose tolerance test with insulin. Um, that's the first one. You want to find out if you've got what level of diabetic physiology you have. If you got a belly, you're already there. You
Mm.
just need to verify it, no matter what your A1C says or your fasting blood glucose, because those can be normal and you're still, full type 2 diabetic. So get that one. And there was a couple other inflammation markers. Just go to my website,
Mm.
danieltrevor.com, click on blood tests, and I got a whole page with
Mm.
the top 4 or 5 most important ones that I would get. There's a male panel and a female panel. And there's one that also that I should mention with regard to the fatty liver disease that I had that I discovered all this information from Ivor Cummins. You know Ivor, right?
Mm.
And he had what I had. He had this fatty liver disease because, see, what the deal is there's most doctors, they don't check what's called GGT, gamma glutamyl transferase. It's a liver enzyme. Most of them, if they check anything, they'll check ALP, AST, ALT, right? They don't check the GGT, the gamma glutamyl transferase. Why is that important? Life insurance companies have to know who to accept and who to reject. And life insurance companies are damn good at analyzing data and statistics since the 1600s when they would insure boats that would go out into the ocean and all that. I mean,
Mm.
they're really damn good at it. That's why they're most successful companies on the planet, right?
Mm.
So, anyway, they discovered that their number one predictor of all cause mortality is having elevated GGT, gamma
Mm.
glutamyl transferase. It's like, who know? Why doesn't the medical community know what the life insurance companies? Would you guys talk to each other, maybe?
Yeah.
I'm thinking, and then, it's just amazing that is just. And then the more I looked into it, I found studies showing that if you have elevated GGT, the usual cause of death is a heart attack.
Mm.
And there I was. So I was, the whole time I'm connecting dots and that kind of thing. So that's another one. But that's part of the male panel or the female panel. You want to make sure that it has GGT in there. Of course, there's the um, you want to get your HDL to triglycerides ratio because that will tell if you've got small dense LDL particles as well. And it's about I think it's 6 to 9 times more predictive of cardiovascular disease than an LDL test.
Yeah.
And anyway, it's danieltrevor.com. And at there, I have a short 7-minute video at the top of the page. It tells my story and some of the creepy statistics that you've heard here a little bit with us. And I love discussing all this thing. If we can get people to hear this information and not be so, to at least inspire them to start to think, oh, maybe I should start to avoid eating this, that, and the other. And if we can get them going in that direction, and that's what we want to do, right?
Very good. Absolutely. Well, the book is called Unholy Trinity by Daniel Trevor. It is out now and available everywhere. And I encourage everyone to go to his website as well and see all the resources there. Daniel, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. Can you please tell people where exactly they can find you? Obviously, your website, etc., but any other sort of social media sites?
Yeah, no, it's basically just danieltrevor.com and you can find me elsewhere from there. But, that's where you
Mm.
get all the information. I have a lot of really good data there and, videos. I'll put this one up there, the one that we do. And that kind and they can sign up. They can get a free preview of the book. And what that is they put in their name and their email address. They can unsubscribe at any time. I send out a weekly newsletter every weekend, Friday, Saturday, that kind of thing. It's got some really good data. A lot of it is from the book, a lot of it's news and that kind of thing. But they sign up, and they get the first 48 pages for free. It's a PDF. Sign up, get that there. And then again, you can, I'm not selling anything. You can. I'm a strong believer in, you taste it a little bit. And if you like the way it tastes, then you can go buy the book.
Yeah. Sounds good. Well, great.
Yeah.
Well, we'll put those links on the description so people can go down below and check it out. And yeah, thank you so much, Daniel. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Dr. A, what do you say? All right. Thank you very
Very
much.
cool.
I really appreciate you having me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Please do go check out Daniel's work and his website and check out his book, The Unholy Trinity. Thank you all very much. We'll see you next time. Hey guys, thank you very much for taking the time out to listen to what I had to say. If you like it, then please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel and podcast. And if you're on YouTube, then please hit that little bell and subscribe, and that'll let you know anytime I have a new video out, which should be every week, if not more. And if you could share this with your friends, that would help me get the word out and let me know that you like what I'm doing. Thanks again, guys.